Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Endless Possibilities panel. My name is Ashley Rayner. I'm a librarian at NORC at the University of Chicago, and I'll be moderating this session. I'm a huge fan of speculative fiction, and we've got some books here that will not only send you to new worlds, they'll also make you think and reflect about the world we have now. I am so excited to welcome Ayana Gray, author of I, Medusa, published by Random House, a retelling of the Medusa myth by Medusa herself. I don't know how many times I can say Medusa in a sentence. That's pretty good. Jayson Greene, author of UnWorld, published by Knopf, about a woman who suffers the loss of a child and also the loss of her AI companion. SenLinYu, author of Alchemised, published by Del Rey, about a prisoner of war who tries to recover her lost memories. Mark Waddell, author of Colin Gets Promoted and Dooms the World, published by Ace, which is pretty much what it says on the tin, except Colin's promotion is in a company that is definitely committing crimes against humanity. And Daniel H. Wilson, author of Hole in the Sky, published by Doubleday, a first contact story that involves a family growing back together, artificial intelligence, and fighting when all hope is lost. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited because we already talked before this session. It's going to be a good group. I can just tell. My first question is for Ayana, author of I, Medusa. A lot of us recovering mythology kids, hello, already know the story of Medusa. What were some of the ways you kept this ancient story fresh and added your own spin to it?
Hi, everyone. So I, Medusa is a villain origin story, and as you mentioned, Medusa is a pretty memorable and pretty iconic figure in Greek mythology. I think so. The story reimagines her as a Black woman, and that in itself is already a pretty revolutionary step from what we've seen in the past in Medusa's story. But I think for me, even more than her Blackness in this book, a lot of the focus on Medusa's story tends to be on her death and her end. And so I mean, in this book, it's maybe a minor spoiler. We don't even see her death on the page. I really wanted to focus on her life and her coming into age story. So that was the focus for me.
Yeah, it's yeah, I definitely that was a surprise to me that Medusa was Black in this story, but it was also just such an interesting take on it, and it definitely informs a lot of how I felt about the character and how it kind of changed my perspective as well. My next question is for Daniel, author of Hole in the Sky. I read a lot of alien first contact stories, and I loved your book's connection to Native American culture and people. Why did you decide to marry these concepts?
Yeah, that's my background. So I'm a Cherokee citizen. I grew up in North Tulsa in what's now the Cherokee Reservation. And I've also enjoyed a lot of alien first contact stories and kind of noticed a little trend where they're basically all kind of a fear projection that what our civilization has done to indigenous people will be done to us. I mean, so the aliens show up and they enslave us, they erase our culture, they steal our resources and do all those things. And so I thought, what if first contact happened in Indian country? Like what would be the native perspective on that? And in a more general sense, what's the native perspective on the unknown, as opposed to a more Western perspective or the perspective of a scientist or a soldier? And so, yeah, I just dove in and went back to where I grew up and the people I know and all the stuff I know and put it into the book and just went straight back to my roots and had a really good time.
I don't know if I had a really good time because it stressed me out, but I did the connection to the people was really palpable. Like you really it felt very, you write about aliens, so of course it's gonna be like a little bit weird, but you
Yeah.
brought it back and it was weird for sure, but it brought it
Oh,
back to
there's a
like
ton of
a
super
connection.
weird cosmology like in Cherokee culture. I mean, every culture talks about aliens and outer
Hmm.
space and stars
Hmm.
and stuff like that. And so just because, it's native doesn't mean they're not talking about space aliens. So I really dug into all of that stuff and put it in. And yeah, some of it's pretty weird.
Yeah, but I meant weird in a positive
Yeah,
way.
yeah. No,
Yeah, I know. That's why I make sure. My next question is for Sen, author of Alchemized. The gothic atmosphere in Alchemized is so hauntingly rendered and almost plays the role of a character in the story itself, heightening themes of mystery, claustrophobia, and suspense. What were some of the most important elements of the setting for you to explore when creating this world?
Well, I knew from the get-go that it was going to be a Gothic fantasy. And so one of the main things with Gothic is the atmosphere. It plays such a huge role in the storytelling. And the way that that's done normally is that it is the exterior, the atmosphere is supposed to reflect the interiority of the character. And so for me, that meant the process started with examining the character. This is a prisoner of war. She's captive. She's dealing with memory loss. Her life and her surroundings are a mystery to her. And so then trying to make her, the place of her captivity, reflect that back at her, the darkness, the sense of claustrophobia, and all of those things, was trying to introduce what she was going through psychologically into her external world.
I'm not as scary. I do read like one scary book a year just to make sure I can do it. But like I'm not usually a gothic person, but I didn't think about that idea of it reflecting the interiority of the person. It makes me think of like Mexican gothic, which of course is gothic, but also some Shirley Jackson stuff. So okay, so you have the outside reflecting the person itself. Okay. My next question is for Mark Waddell, author of Colin Gets Promoted and Dooms the World. For another panel, I read another great a comic book that reflected an infernal workplace, which begs a larger question: are all workplaces infernal? I'm not sure. What for you is so compelling about setting your novel in an office that can literally be murder on its employees?
Yeah, so I really when I began creating this world, that's the book is centered around a company called Dark Enterprises that's been around for thousands of years, and does genuinely terrible things. And Colin, the protagonist, begins the story working in human resources, which is where they take humans and they extract their resources, and use them for all sorts of nefarious purposes. We don't know what happens to those people afterwards, but it's probably not good. And what I loved as I was creating this world was trying to bring together sort of genuinely terrible things, but package them in this bland corporate language of quotas and spreadsheets and buzzwords. And bringing those together, it begins to edge into the absurd. And that is, I really had fun playing in that space. It's a great space for potential humor, but also just to make people stop and think about, oh yeah, really, like, a lot of companies are doing a lot of really terrible things, and for most of their employees it's just every day, it's just banal. And I just had a great time trying to take the worst things I could imagine and sort of package them in this bland corporate world, and just see what I could do with that.
It's really funny. I feel like your idea of a great time and my idea of a great time are different. But I did like
Probably.
this book is very funny. And I mean, we'll talk about it later, but that connection between like the banality of what people are doing every day and like the horrible things that can happen was really interesting. It was interesting tension throughout the book, and we'll talk about it later for sure. My next question is for Jayson. And I admitted this in our little before meeting, and I'm going to admit it again. I'm an AI hater. I would love to be proven wrong. If you guys have any good cases for using it, put it in the chat. But I'm not sure your book convinced me otherwise. Can you talk about how you explored our human connections to technology in UnWorld?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things I really wanted to write about was how fragmented personalities and how we can become alienated from really important and emotionally sort of turbulent parts of ourselves, right? And so much of what AI does is it rips those parts out of us and puts them into this sort of digital ether, or I suppose you could also use the word slop, depending on your perspective, right? I mean, we externalize so much of our knowledge, so much of our feelings now. And so what you end up with is this sort of weird patchwork. I mean, scrolling through any social media app gives you this feeling in miniature in about 5 seconds, where you are talking to various parts of people's fragmented psyches. They're yelling at you through their screen. And I wanted to explore this feeling of alienation from yourself, right? As we disembody ourselves, which is basically what AI is doing. It is disembodying knowledge from us. And like, what does it feel like to live in a world and have things happen to you, real human things like terror and tragedy and loss, in a world where so much of us has been disembodied? And if that were to continue to happen, how many huge gaping holes would we feel in ourselves and in the world around us? What kind of loneliness would we sort of be experiencing? So fun stuff.
I think sometimes when you're processing those difficult emotions, though, it is helpful to kind of put it outside yourself, maybe to get a different perspective. I think maybe I'm just like talking about myself, like maybe I'm telling on myself, but like, that way you can kind of see it like outside of yourself. Like, so I think that's kind of some of the ways that I use social media, especially when something is frustrating or
Yeah.
bothering me. But like the idea of it, yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm myself most places. So it's just, but it's interesting how
Yeah.
people do those different perspectives that I wouldn't think of. So,
Well, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm against, like when I say externalize, I don't mean everyone should keep everything bottled up inside until they die of cancer. I don't mean that, obviously, but I do mean that we're putting all this stuff in the
yeah,
hands
sure.
of literal companies that are then gamifying all the shit we feel.
So like the
Anyway.
evil company that Colin works for in his book, for sure. I get it. My next question is for Ayana. I enjoyed the relationship between Medusa and her two very different sisters. They're not a big part of the original myth. They are mentioned, and they're immortal and she is mortal, but they play but there's not a ton of them in the original myth, but they play a really large role in your story. Why did you decide to bring them to the forefront?
So I didn't consciously do this like as a writer over time, but something that I have realized I do is I look for the gaps when I'm reading, when I'm writing, when I'm like kind of just wandering around on walks. I look for the gaps. And as you mentioned, Medusa canonically has multiple siblings, but the two that people mostly know are Steno, her older sister, and Euryale, her kind of middle sister, and Medusa's the youngest. And so there's references to them. Fun fact, Steno, the oldest of them, actually is known for killing more people than Medusa. But there's just not a lot of there's not a lot of information about either of them. And so when I was focusing on Medusa or Medi's origin story, I thought that it would be really fun to bring them in more and explore their personalities and how they shape. I call her Medi because she becomes Medusa. She's Medi for most of the story. Um, like I don't want to spoil either, but even the fact that she has these two really beautiful older sisters who are immortal and who will live forever, and they know that, and they live their lives knowing that they don't have to think about mortality the way that Medi does. I thought that was a really interesting sort of friction between, like, sisters have friction. I have a younger sister, friction between siblings always happens, but what is it like when you have older siblings who you look up to, who look at life completely differently than you? How would that shape you? I just thought that was a really interesting thing to play with because we all know Medusa's end and how she grapples with mortality against her family and against kind of what she knows is going to happen to her was just a fun thing to explore.
I really like the idea of looking for the gaps and filling in those gaps. Like how does that how that informs your writing? It must be so interesting. My next question is for Daniel. Jim and Tawny. These are two. Jim, I would say, is one of the protagonists, and Tawny is his daughter. Father and daughter reconciling after an absence. They felt like the central relationship in the story to me. What inspired their connection for you?
Yeah, so Jim and Tawny are native characters in the book, and Tawny's like 14 or something. And I was just pulling from my real life, man. Like I have 3 kids. I have loved being a dad, but 14 like hit me hard. Like I took it personally, whenever the kid like stopped talking to me, stopped holding my hand and all that stuff. And so, first of all, just looking into my own life and pulling what that relationship is like with somebody, and just thinking a little bit about how our kids can make us better versions of the people we think we are. Like, when they're real little, you obviously have to sort of protect your kids. And you get thrust into the role of maybe, being the protector, being the person in charge, and being that version of yourself, because somebody needs you, right? But whenever they get to be teenagers, they become like these hypocrisy detection machines, and so you end up analyzing your life a little bit more cerebrally to try to, I don't know, to try not to seem like a jerk, to your own kids. But thematically, a lot of what the book is about is looking backward to move forward and sort of honoring like traditional knowledge, right? There's this sort of idea that the Western perspective, the AI, the technology, that's where all the advances are, and the cutting edge, and there's sort of no value to traditional knowledge, or even indigenous technology, like looking at just sort of how to deal with the whole ecosystem, or how to acknowledge your embodiment in the world. And so having them be estranged and having this big, this thing that's happened in their past, this tragedy, having Jim have to go back and turn around and face what happened and heal from that in order to move forward, it's a big part of the book. And so yeah, that's really why I dove in there. but mostly just working through my own emotions about having a teenager living in my house. So that's really where that came from.
There's a concept in like Ghanaian culture called Sankofa, which is the same thing, looking back to go forward. And so that it's interesting. Again, like we're talking about different cultures here, but the same concepts in different ways. Also, I have a 2-year-old and an 8-year-old, and you're making me a little bit nervous about the next couple of years. I'm sure it'll be fine. It's fine. My next question is for Sen. This novel grapples with very serious themes, including depictions of the tolls of war. Why did you choose a fantasy setting to explore these themes? What do you hope readers take away from Helena's journey?
So I find that with real world literature, sometimes I can go in with preconceived notions of like the setting or like, oh, this is what things were like. And so I really enjoy a lot of what I really enjoy about science fiction and fantasy is the fact that you come in with a suspension of disbelief that allows you to get a little bit closer to a concept or a situation than maybe you would if you were reading real world literature. And I feel like especially war, we just have there's so many ideas of what war is that we get from either propaganda or media or just the way that it gets depicted in a lot of literature because it's just been written about for hundreds of years. And so I wanted to use the fantasy lens instead in order to just get to kind of take a slightly different angle on it. In writing Alchemized, I wanted to explore the kind of the archetype of the strong female character because that really exploded right as I was coming out at like middle school, high school age. And I loved it of seeing like all of a sudden having this pushback of girls can fight, girls can do all of these things that boys can do. They can be the hero of the story instead of it need them always being like more the supportive role that they're strapped with. But at the same time, as I was reaching adulthood, starting to notice that the strong female characters were always only strong in really masculine ways where they could kill and they could fight and they could do the manly things, but there was never any acknowledgement that women have been strong, have always been strong, have been doing important thing. It was just oh no, women can be if they do all of the masculine things instead. And so I wanted to tell a story that is kind of in a very masculine environment of a war, but that focused more on the feminine contributions within that we just tend to skip over or because they're really uncomfortable or because we're just used to not seeing them as particularly important.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about where, our thoughts of where strength comes from, especially in like our current environment. And what does it mean to be strong? What does it mean to be supportive? And a lot of times it's not like the fighting, it's the inner work, it's the emotional intelligence, it's social intelligence. All that stuff to me at this point is strength more so than, I guess lifting heavy stuff is strong too, but like, for me, it's like how are you strong and how are you helping in a way that's not just like fighting? And so that's really cool that your character explores that in a different way. My next question is for Mark. So this book, like the title says, is about the world being doomed, but it's also really funny. I cannot tell you guys how funny it was. How do you marry the dark themes with your unique humor?
Well, thank you for saying that. And I'm glad you found it funny. So I really, I love dark humor myself. And I know that that's not for everyone, but for me, I find it really cathartic to laugh at terrible things, because a lot of the other options are pretty grim. So, um, so that's part of it for sure. I think also, Ashley, you said at the very beginning, sort of one thing that I love about speculative fiction, about fantasy and sci-fi is how it can provide a sort of funhouse mirror almost to real world issues, right? And sort of allow us to look at them a little differently. And I mean, I think every single day we're seeing in the news that the world is doomed or that the sky is falling, and that's pretty bleak. But uh, with this book, I wanted to put a spin on it that yeah, the world is doomed, but it's also kind of hilarious how this one insecure white male and his ambition ends up dooming the whole world. It's like, yeah, I guess we're seeing a lot of that. And but uh but we can sort of understand why he's doing it and laugh along with um, all of his many missteps, and I don't know. It's sort of a, again, I found it cathartic to write this as well, and just sort of amuse myself at the expense of the entire world, I guess.
Is the expression, I don't know if you heard of this expression, you have to laugh to keep from crying. And I feel like that a lot of the time, but I mean, the stuff is funny. It's just like, how do you cope? And so
Yeah,
that's one way to cope. I think it's better than just like laying down in the fetal position. At least, at least you can laugh about it. And it's like, all right, what can we do next? And that's the thing about
right.
Colin that I really liked. He did have a lot of situations where he probably should just lay down, but he got up and he kept trying to figure out what he could do next. And so that was really, I was like, inspirational. It was great. My next question is for Jayson. Kathy, one of the narrators of your story, is an addict, and she says it almost as a badge of honor instead of the shameful way society often means the term. Why that was really like affecting for me. Why did you include her label in your novel?
Well, thank you for also. I'm glad to hear that that was the way that that hit for you. Basically, the characters, the two of the main characters, Anna and Kathy. This is a novel about inner work, to use a term that you use, where every character either has or has not done inner work and the way that manifests. And so Anna, the woman who sort of breaks up with her AI companion, has in some ways let the AI companion become the repository of her inner work. And both she and Kathy have these immense holes that they have not figured out how to fill, or they've tried filling. And what's interesting to me about a person with an addiction is that, first of all, that usually is a starting point for someone to pursue the sort of behavior that leads you to a life where you are addicted to something, but also to recover from addiction or to live as a recovering addict, to use that word that she uses it the same way. You have to have done that inner work. You have to really do this unsparing inner survey of your drives, your wants, your desires, your weaknesses, and all the parts of yourself that you would ordinarily try to drown out. And so she became the perfect companion in the sort of mediated way that she becomes Anna's friend through her AI companion. But the reason that Kathy uses the label is because that, to me, just came out of the quirk of her character as I was writing her. She was very iconoclastic, self-consciously so. Like, she's like, I can become a recovering addict, but only if I do it my way, right? I don't want to go to the same group that everyone else goes to. I don't want to do this. It was just, she was sort of the person who defined herself against a lot of whatever anyone else, and not because she was defiant, but because it was just the way that she was able to function. And so for her, that was just, she claimed the word because it gave her a sort of sense of affirmation. And it was I don't know, she's also an academic who's obsessed with words and what they do and what they mean. And so it made sense to me that someone like that would engage in that kind of intellectual exercise where they would say to people, well, actually, this is how I feel and I love the label and this is who I am. And it was just sort of like, I don't know, it came out of my affection for her. It wasn't something I set out to do when I wrote the book. I wasn't setting down on my list of things I want this book to accomplish. I wasn't like, I want the character to reclaim this label of addict. It was nowhere in my consciousness, but it came out as I wrote her.
I can't believe you hit us with a well, actually. But thinking about this character, I feel like that's kind of her vibe, but like in the nicest way possible. Like she's very accessible. She's like, these are my struggles, and this is the work that I've done. Also, I think it's interesting that she said that Anna broke up with the AI. I thought the AI broke up with her, but I guess that's
It is.
exercise best left
I
to the
mean,
reader.
it is more like that, though. I mean, you're
Yeah.
right. That
It's
is accurate.
and it's not really I mean, this happens very early in the book, so we're not spoiling too much for you, but it's more about the how everyone deals with that and like the repercussions of that, less so about the action itself.
Mm.
Just you should still read the book for sure. Don't We didn't spoil it for you. My next question is for Ayana. uh a lot of people in your novel get blamed for things that are not truly their fault, which is really stressful to me. Even though their agency is taken away from them, how do you give your characters the ability to impact the story?
So one of my like real life degrees is in political science, which I feel like is just me saying I like to argue a lot. So I have a piece of paper that says that now. But one thing, being a poli-sci student, something that my professors really ingrained into me was to look for power where you see it and where there's scarcity of power. And that was something, I mean, I didn't know when I was in college that I would be an author, but it's affected my writing because when I'm world building, I often look for where is power, where is it not, and what happens when those two things collide. And so, because it affects agency. And so we know, like in this story, our main character is Medusa. She is someone who is surrounded by power. She is literally surrounded by immortals, by gods who have immense power, immense strength, and she does not. And that's uncomfortable for her and for the reader. Um, but and I think Daniel kind of touched on this earlier. I like exploring what happens to oppressed people who are trying to get more power or assert more power. Um, Medusa's parents, and this is also part of her canon that a lot of people don't know, her parents are sea gods. They're not very well known sea gods, and there's not a lot about them in lore and in canon. And so in this story, her father is kind of a sea god who's been demoted, and he is doing everything he can to climb the ranks and climb the hierarchy. And that includes using his children as tools of power to get more power by creating marriages that elevate him, and he will do anything for that power. And so you look at a character like him and you think he's awful, and then you learn more about his story and Medusa's mother's story and how their own power was stripped and they are oppressed in a different way. Um, and it creates this really, to me, just like uncomfortable question of like, what's justified? If you've had your power taken away, is it okay to then assert yourself over someone else who's even more oppressed than you are? And there are no easy answers to those questions, but I think we see it in the real world all the time when people who are pushed to the edge do sometimes what we would think of as horrific things um, because they have nothing. And obviously Medusa's arc, this is not a spoiler. I mean, we know what she begins as, and we know she becomes a monster. And so playing around with what's justified, how do people get agency when it's not given to them? When is it okay for them to take what they feel that they're owed? Um, all of those things, those are just questions that I like to ask myself and play with. It's something that I did when I was a student. I took a whole class on political violence that that's all we did was ask ourselves what's justified. And so it's fun to put it into a fantasy space and grapple with those same questions.
It was really interesting because, and you reminded me of this, like literally, I understood the motivation of every character. I was like, you know what, I get it. Like, maybe it wasn't what I would do, but I get it. Like, it's not right, but it's okay. So, like, I really felt that through your book, and I thought that was really compelling. It's like I could identify or understand like every character, which is not always how that works. So, it was really interesting to read. My next question is for Daniel. Michaela, she's a researcher on Voyager. Remember the ships that we sent out in the 70s and they're just kind of out in space now, flying away forever. She does research on that. She might be my favorite character, even though I felt like I didn't understand her choices at all. That's ironic given what we just talked about.
Yeah.
But I did understand her desire for connection and belonging. How do you help the audience connect with a character who feels like an alien herself?
Yeah, I mean, so part of what I wanted to do, I think of sort of First Contact and the aliens as, in whatever incarnation they show up, as the unknown. It's like the embodiment of the unknown. And I tell the story through the perspective of three different characters. One is got the native perspective on the unknown, and then there's a soldier character who's more like what you'd expect from the government. And then there's Michaela, and she really represents sort of a scientific posture toward the unknown. She wants to understand everything, and she wants to, break it apart and figure out how to use it. And so, whenever I was building that character, I really built Michaela out of my experiences growing up in North Tulsa, growing up in Oklahoma, and then leaving that and going to graduate school at Carnegie Mellon, at this place where there were these people from all over the world, and they were so smart, and like you just feel like you don't belong, right? Like, but there is this kind of unifying aspect of just looking for knowledge, looking for truth, and it doesn't really care what you look like in the world. If you're looking for like that platonic reality, that platonic ideal that's out there, that just the information and the truth, then that kind of unites everybody. And so Michaela is a character who, she doesn't look like people want her to look. She's not who people expect whenever they're thinking about a NASA astrophysicist. And people are projecting all this stuff on her. that's not her, right? So they're telling her she doesn't talk right, she doesn't, act right, she's not interested in the right things. And this has kind of created a character who doesn't give many F's about what people think. And she's just after the truth. She just wants to go see what's there. And this, I think that her experiences have sort of created a character that, is a little hard to relate to, right? Because she's almost been twisted in some ways by all these expectations that society has put on her, and just defying those, and ending up where she is, at NASA, and mostly not having people that look like her around her, and people constantly sort of, just having expectations that aren't in line with who she actually is. And so yeah, she was a really fun character. She curses a lot. She just doesn't care what other people think at all. And I've had some experience, right? I almost wrote her like I would write a robot. Like I've written Robopocalypse, and I have this degree in robotics, and I've written a lot of sort of characters that are either on the spectrum or just don't necessarily abide by the human rules. And she has these augmented reality glasses that fill in details about what people are thinking, and just their biographical information and stuff like that. And that's just sort of there to just show how little she cares about other people. So in a lot of ways, she's sort of a quintessential scientist character, almost like, you imagine, like, remember the movie The Fly, where he wears the same clothes every day and like just not worried about what people are thinking. So yeah, I wasn't necessarily super worried about the audience being able to relate to her so much, except to see her posture toward the unknown and her just rabid desire to understand what's out there and to go see what she can see.
I didn't think about it till you said it, but if you are a person of color that has been in a situation where people don't expect you to be there, then you would definitely identify with her. And I didn't think I was like, okay, now I kind of get it, because I think a lot of us have been in those situations where it's like, oh, we don't expect you to be here. What are you doing here? And then you have to pop out to show everybody. So
yeah, or you have to prove your bona fides,
yeah,
or like, yeah,
which is exhausting, but it's also
yeah.
really satisfying when it works. So, and it always does. So anyway, that's really interesting. That's a different perspective on that character I did not consider until just now. My next question is for Sen. Without spoiling the novel's twists and turns, the story opens with Helena, the protagonist, a healer who was captured during a war and only recently has awoken in a new, much darker world. Why did you choose to start the story in the middle of the action?
So I didn't want the twist to be that the war is lost, that you like go along with this war and then they lose, and then you have to go through the whole process of the fallout of that. I wanted the twist to be more just uncovering the context of that loss. One of my favorite quotes is that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And so when I was conceptualizing the story that sort of takes place in medias res, is very much trying to create a sort of poetry between the present and the past, where there's different actions and things that sort of resonate across time with each other. And I also, because there's this mystery element of it in which Helena doesn't know what she's forgotten. She is as much in the dark as the characters who are keeping her captive, trying to figure out what she's hiding. I wanted the readers to be able to go on that journey with her, rather than be coming in with knowledge of what she's hiding and waiting for her to figure it out. I just felt like that would be a rather arduous like reading experience, to be waiting for a character to figure something out like that.
Yeah, it's like those, like, who did it, there's like a certain type of mystery where you already know who did it, and it's just like you've had to figure out how. And sometimes it's like, no, I want all the mystery. I want to figure it out with the person. So that's a really compelling way to tell a story. I always feel like we're in it with you, or we're in it with the character. We're seeing what they see and we're figuring it out with them in real time. My next question is for Jayson. We, the audience, get to know Alex, Anna's death son, only through flashbacks and the memories of others. Why did you decide to portray this pivotal character this way?
Yeah, well, because the main theme of the novel is, what do we do after we've lost someone, and it has sort of shattered our conception of ourselves and of our entire reality. And you can't explore grief unless you start from grief, if that makes sense. It's a little half-baked, but I mean, I can say from my personal experience with grief, having written a memoir about it before, that trauma itself, the act of trauma when it happens to you, is not an interesting story. It is an event. The story is what happens to you after. The only human reactions are the ones that occur in response to trauma and in response to tragedy. And the only way that humans recover from trauma is in living on after it. And I thought that if you were to witness what happens to the character who dies in the story, it would become a story about death. It would not become a story about how to reckon with loss. And we only really feel the pain of what we've lost with this character by seeing him in retrospect, right? We read every line of his dialogue knowing that he's not alive. We see him struggle and talk to his friend knowing that he's not alive anymore, right? And that's why.
Yeah, you know, that's the thing about grief that's so hard. It's not a linear process, but the only way out is through. And so you just kind of have to feel those feelings and experience it no matter what there's no magic secret way to experience. You just have to do it. And I think that's very clear in your book.
No, and especially with traumatic loss, which is what this
Hmm.
book deals with, there's a
Hmm.
way in which the event is always happening, right? It's never not happening. It occurs in the present tense. And when something happens like that to us, it freezes itself a little bit. I mean, this is what people who actually treat trauma often talk about, is where there's a part of you that never realizes that moment has gone on, right? And there's a part of you to whom that thing is always happening. And so the characters, we don't need to see anything. It's living in them. We can feel the way he's living inside of them. And all we need to see is what they do and how it gnaws at them and how they move through the world to understand his death.
Yeah, it's a really clear way to explain it, unfortunately. I mean, it's a what I want to say, like a structure for kind of understanding it. Scaffolding. I can't think of the right word. Need more coffee, I guess. But my next question is for Mark. I really enjoyed Colin's perspective because he seems like a fundamentally good person, question mark, who is dealing with a difficult situation and occasionally does some very nasty things. How do you make a character with, let's say, a loose grip on morality relatable?
Yeah. So I knew when I began writing this book, which was years ago, I wanted the protagonist to be very complicated and morally gray. I find that way more interesting than the sort of white knight archetype that used to pop up in fantasy novels all the time. And uh, in fact, when I gave my husband the draft of this, he said, "I hate this character so much," and he still says that to this day. He really hates him. And when I sent this to my agent, she said, I don't think this character is relatable, and I don't think we'll be able to sell this book." And I said, "Well, let's just see what happens." And I knew I'd found the right people at Berkeley and at Ace when they said to me, "We actually want Colin to be more psychotic." And I said, "Great, okay, so we're on the same page." But no, so Colin he is complicated, but he is fundamentally damaged, and he is we get glimpses of his past and of his own trauma, which is he feels very powerless, right? He was bullied in school, he's bullied in the workplace, he feels he's been overlooked, he's deeply lonely. And there were definitely parts of my own experience that are in there. And what I wanted to do was show the reader, and this is similar to the conversation about Medi and about what she goes through in terms of agency and power, right? He's desperate for respect and for power, and willing to do anything to get there, and those sort of character flaws drive the whole plot of the story. But along the way, hopefully, people can relate to why he's doing these things that have such terrible consequences, because we've all felt powerless, right? We've all felt overlooked, we've all felt lonely at times. And yes, maybe we haven't made the same choices that Colin's making, but maybe we would. right? Maybe if a shadowy, mysterious being said, I will give you anything you want. If you know, maybe we would say yes. And that's part of what I want readers to maybe is think about, like, huh, I don't know that I would do this, but I also don't know that I wouldn't do this.
It's kind of like I was saying with Ayana. Yeah, it's like I may not like it, but I understand. And like we have a Pulitzer Prize winning hater now, so like hating is definitely a sport. So I in some ways, like, yeah, again, I don't know if I do everything that Colin did, but I like appreciated why he did it. And I like when you have the backgrounds of like all that like struggle and pain and issues, it's like maybe not what I would do, but I get it, and I think that's the thing that the book gets across. It's like it's understandable somewhat. My next question is for Ayana. And I wanted to talk about this because this is one of the main things that one of Medi's distinguishing features. Hair is such an important part of Medusa's life. You can see on the cover she has these beautiful locks. I really felt for Medusa when her locks were turned into snakes. What do you think this change symbolizes for her?
Okay, so you can't see it, but I've just gotten on my soapbox. Um, I
I love
really,
it.
I get very frustrated the older I get. When I see discussions, and this happens to boys and girls, but I see it happen to girls in particular, when their innocence is tied to their sexuality. You lose your virginity and now you've lost your innocence and you're an adult now. That really frustrates me. Um, and so so a part of one of the most famous versions of Medusa's story is the version where she's assaulted by Poseidon and then she's punished for that by being turned into a Gorgon. And so when kind of engaging with that part of her story and her myth, there's a moment when she's assaulted. I did not want that to be the moment she lost her girlhood and her innocence. Um, in the story throughout, there are moments where she talks about how much her hair means to her and how much love has been put into her hair. Her sisters, if you know kind of how dreadlocks, or I prefer to call them locks, how they're put in, like there's a process and they have to be cared for. And she talks about how her sisters were the ones who taught her how to lock her hair. They're the ones who taught her how to care for it. They have literally grown with her. And so when she loses that, that is kind of the transition. It's not when she loses her virginity through assault. It's when she literally loses this physical symbol of her love and her family and what makes her her. And that was really important. In villain origin stories, there's always the moment when they go from being one thing to another. And I wanted a really visual moment on page where we're seeing the locks literally like they're coming out as the snakes are pushing them out, and she's having to leave Medi behind because Medi had locks, Medusa has snakes. So hopping off my soapbox now, but that's just really, really important to me. I wish we would let kids be kids and also just not tie so much up in sexuality. Like loss of innocence happens at all different stages. Growth happens at different stages. It's not all tied up with sex. So that was really important to me.
The soapbox was perfect. Elisa and a lot of people are saying amen. Thank you in the comments. So stay on the soapbox. We need you there. We have about 5 minutes left. So this is like the lightning round. I'm sorry that we had to do this. My next question is for Sen. Resonance is such a fascinating magic system where characters in the world of Palladia have an affinity for certain metals and elements and can transform and transmute them through touch. How did you first envision this world and the reasons for why this type of magic would make sense in the context of Palladia's history? Uh-oh, you're still on mute, hon. It's okay.
So originally the idea came to me because I really enjoy watching animation. I just feel like that as an art form, it explores things visually in ways that live action doesn't. And so I really would enjoy the way that they would do combat scenes, how they would make weapons change shapes and those types of things. And so I wanted to do world building that kind of enabled me to like explore that. And so that was really where it started. But I wanted there to be some interesting limitations in order to then explore, like kind of through society, how that would evolve as people were having these abilities, but they're limited to a specific type of metal. How would they utilize that? Well, and so then you have the formation of guilds. You have people using that to establish a sort of hierarchy with the metals of gold is the best, and then you go down to like lead and the baser metals down at the bottom. And so, and get to just sort of explore how a society would sort of, it would begin to conceptualize itself there in that way. And then part of the story is that this is an ability that is sort of evolving as time is passing. And so there are characters that have abilities that are considered more taboo, where instead of their resonance being with metals and animate objects, they have resonance with bodies. And so they can do healing, they can also perform necromancy. And so there becomes this religious element of necromancy being this absolute taboo. But when this war breaks out, the one side decides to embrace necromancy as a weapon in order to try to win. And so you have one side that's just morally opposed to ever using necromancy. And then you have this other side that is just willing to do whatever it takes. And then Helena is the protagonist. She's in the middle because she actually is a vivimancer. She has this healing ability, but she also has the potential to perform necromancy, but she's on the side that won't use it. And so she's sort of in this trap position of gray area where she's forbidden from using her abilities in this way that would be very extreme, but at the same time, instead she's forced to watch the people around her dying and her side losing because there's this step that they won't take.
That is it's just so wild to think of gold being the most, even though it's like the fanciest element, I know, because I know it's hard to work with. So it's just like interesting to see like how that would work in this setting. My next question is probably going to be one of our last questions just because we're out of time. We had too much fun, which is always an issue in my panels. For Daniel, there are a lot of distinctive elements in this book, but my favorite is the pattern and the man downstairs, which is a computer program that somehow predicts the future, and the human who interprets it respectively. What was the inspiration for this technology?
Yeah, I mean, I write a lot of artificial intelligence and stuff like that. And what I've noticed is as science is progressing, getting farther and farther out there, the stuff that we're finding out is kind of crazy, right? Like all the quantum physics stuff, like retrocausality, like the fact that quantum physics happens the same forward as it does backwards, which means that causality can possibly be turned around. And, so anyway, looking at all of that and trying to kind of find a new perspective on AI that's going to be more interesting than just like what we've seen already, like Skynet and just this stuff that's just been done to death. Having studied AI, I always thought that the first AI would be some kind of really crazy brain that would be almost like an alien, but in reality, with large language models, what we're seeing is kind of just it's trained on the internet. So it's just like a funhouse mirror of ourselves. And it's like, it's almost more human than we are. And so with that in mind, I wanted to find sort of a crazy AI that's kind of tapping into the collective unconscious of humanity and put it in this super spooky place with where it's just making up poetry, but the poetry every now and then predicts the future, or it predicts something that's happening right now, something that I could never know. And also, I'm adapting this novel for Netflix right now with Sterling Harjo attached to, and so like working with Sterling, like he really fell in love with this whole idea of the man downstairs, and so we ended up spending a bunch of time just talking about how woo-woo that would be and how to just take AI and make it just more organic and more, a little bit more traditional, but also just something new that we haven't seen before. So in a nutshell, sorry. And that's it.
No, I love the nutshell. It's a perfect nutshell, and it's a great way to end this panel. Thank you all so much. This was so much fun, and you can see in the chat, everyone's like, we're definitely adding this to our TBR list, so mission accomplished. Thank you for the librarians for joining us today. Thank you for your comments. It was wonderful. Next, we have two concurrent panels, The Magic of Love and Personal Stories. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks so much.